Imagine 70 warships being dragged up a mountain in complete darkness. Thousands of men straining against impossible odds, their hands bleeding, their backs breaking, all to deliver death from an angle no one thought possible. This isn't fantasy. This happened. And what followed was so brutal, so revolutionary, that it shattered 1,000 years of warfare and drowned an entire way of life in blood and fire. This is the story of the last great siege of the medieval world, where steel met gunpowder, and only one would survive. The year is 1453. Constantinople, the queen of cities, the last fragment of the Roman Empire, stands defiant against the darkness gathering at her walls. For over 1,000 years, these walls have never fallen to a foreign invader. Emperors have come and gone, empires have risen and crumbled to dust, but Constantinople remains, a glittering jewel of Christianity surrounded by an ocean of Islamic conquest. But now, something different is coming, something the world has never seen before. His name is Mehmed. He is 21 years old, and he has already earned a reputation that makes grown men whisper prayers in the night. They call him many things, but history will know him as Mehmed the Conqueror, and he is bringing with him weapons that will change warfare forever. Picture the scene as spring arrives in 1453. The Ottoman army materializes like a nightmare made flesh. 80,000 warriors, maybe more, their camps spreading across the landscape like a plague. Janissaries, the elite slave soldiers taken as children and forged into perfect killing machines, stand in perfect formation. Their loyalty is absolute, their discipline terrifying. They know no fear because fear has been beaten out of them since childhood. But it's not the soldiers that make defenders weep when they peer over the walls. It's the guns. There, gleaming in the spring sun, sits a monster of bronze and iron that seems torn from the apocalypse itself. The massive cannon, soon to be known as the Basilica, is 27 feet long and weighs over 30,000 pounds. Its barrel is so wide that a grown man could crawl inside it. The stone balls it fires weigh over 1,200 pounds each, and when they strike, they don't just damage walls, they obliterate them. They turn stone to powder and men to red mist. This weapon was built by a Hungarian engineer named Urban, a man who had first offered his services to the Byzantines. Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, had listened to Urban's proposal and then done the math. He couldn't afford it. The Byzantine treasury was empty, the empire reduced to little more than a city-state clinging to past glories. So Urban walked across the lines and offered his genius to Mehmed instead. The young sultan had smiled and given Urban everything he needed: money, resources, workers, and a simple command: build me a gun that can break those walls. Urban had delivered.
The medieval world was built on walls, thick walls, stone walls that had protected cities for millennia. Walls that made sieges last for years, that broke armies against them like waves against cliffs. The fundamental equation of medieval warfare was simple. Defenders behind walls had an almost insurmountable advantage. Attackers would starve, disease would ravage their camps, and eventually they would give up and go home. But gunpowder changed that equation forever. When the Basilica fired, the sound was said to be heard 12 miles away. The ground shook. Pregnant women in the city miscarried from the shock. The cannonball would arc through the air, almost lazy in its flight, before striking the ancient Theodosian Walls with the force of an earthquake. Stone that had stood for 1,000 years would crack, towers would shudder, and piece by piece, hour by hour, day by day, the walls would begin to crumble. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI knew he was watching the death of his world. He had 7,000 defenders, maybe 8,000 if you counted every man who could hold a sword. Mehmed had 80,000. Constantine had the walls, but Mehmed had the guns. The math was simple, and it was horrifying. But Constantine also had something else. He had Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese mercenary captain who is quite possibly the finest defensive military mind in Europe. Giustiniani had brought 700 professional soldiers with him, men who knew their craft, and he had a plan to keep Constantinople alive, at least for a while. Every night, After Mehmed's guns had pounded the walls all day, Giustiniani's men would emerge from the gates like ghosts. They would work through the darkness, hauling rubble, timber, and earth to repair the breaches. They built new walls behind the old ones. They dug trenches. They created killing fields where Ottoman soldiers would have to advance through a nightmare of obstacles, while Byzantine crossbowmen and archers turned them into pincushions. And it worked. For weeks, it worked. But Mehmed was not just a brute with big guns. He was a strategic genius, educated in the finest traditions of both Islamic and Byzantine military thought. And he was looking at a map of Constantinople with a problem that needed solving. The city was protected on three sides. To the west, the massive Theodosian Walls, triple-layered and formidable even under bombardment. To the south, the Sea of Marmara, controlled by Byzantine and Italian ships, and to the north, the Golden Horn, a natural harbor that served as Constantinople's lifeline to the sea. The Byzantines had blocked the entrance to the Golden Horn with a massive chain stretched across the water. It was an ancient tactic, and it worked. Ottoman ships couldn't get in. As long as the Golden Horn remained secure, Constantinople could be resupplied by sea, and the siege could last indefinitely. Mehmed studied this problem. Then, he did something that seemed impossible. He decided to move his ships over the mountain. Let that sink in for a moment. 70 warships, each weighing tons, needed to cross a ridge of hills to bypass the chain and enter the Golden Horn from the north. It was insane. It was impossible. So, of course, Mehmed did it. His engineers built a greased wooden roadway over the hills behind the suburb of Galata. They used a combination of oxen, thousands of men, and wooden rollers, and then, in one night, they hauled 70 ships over a mountain. Imagine being a Byzantine defender, exhausted from another night of repairing walls, catching a few hours of sleep as the sun rises. You wake to screams of horror and disbelief. You run to the walls facing the Golden Horn, the one place you thought was safe. And there, where there should be nothing but empty water, you see ships. 70 Ottoman warships floating in your protected harbor, their crews cheering in triumph. It was a psychological blow that cannot be overstated. The Byzantines had counted on the Golden Horn being secure. Now, suddenly, they had to defend another mile of seawalls with forces they didn't have. The noose was tightening. As April turned to May, the situation inside Constantinople became desperate. Food was running low. Every day, more sections of the Theodosian Walls crumbled under the relentless bombardment. The defenders were exhausted, running on willpower and prayer. They knew what was coming. Mehmed had been patient, but patience has limits. On May 28th, he gave his army a rest day and a promise. Tomorrow, they would storm the city, and when Constantinople fell, his men would have 3 days to plunder everything they could find. 3 days. 3 days to take whatever they wanted. Gold, jewels, silks, women, children, slaves. The promise of loot was the oldest motivator in warfare, and Mehmed was offering his men the richest city in the Christian world. That night, Constantinople prepared for the end. Emperor Constantine rode through the streets, speaking to his people. He visited the churches and prayed. He made his peace with God because he knew he would not see another sunset. There would be no surrender, no escape, no mercy. The ancient prophecy said that Constantinople would only fall when the moon was dark. On the night of May 28, 1453, the moon entered eclipse. As darkness swallowed the moon, the defenders watched in horror. Even heaven, it seemed, had abandoned them. Just after midnight on May 29th, hell arrived. The Ottoman assault began with the sound like the end of the world. Every gun, every cannon, every piece of artillery Mehmed possessed opened fire at once. The night turned to day as muzzle flashes lit the darkness. The ground shook so violently that people couldn't stand. And then, out of the smoke and chaos, came the first wave. These weren't the elite janissaries. These were the Bashi bazooks, irregular troops, expendable men. Mehmed threw them at the walls like a human battering ram, not expecting them to succeed, but to exhaust the defenders, to use up their arrows, to fill the ditches with bodies that the next wave could use as stepping stones. The slaughter was incredible. Byzantine archers, crossbowmen, and the few remaining guns cut the bashibazouks down in waves. Bodies piled upon bodies. Blood ran down the walls in streams. Men screamed in a dozen languages as they died in the smoke and darkness. Some fell into the defensive ditches and drowned in their own blood, crushed by the weight of those falling on top of them. But they kept coming, wave after wave, human flesh against stone and steel. Then came the second wave, Anatolian regulars, better trained, better equipped. They brought siege ladders and scaling equipment. The fighting on the walls became hand-to-hand, brutal, primal. Swords met shields, spears punched through armor, men grappled on narrow walkways with drops to death on either side. Giovanni Giustiniani was everywhere, rallying his men, plugging gaps in the line, his armor covered in blood and dents. For hours he held the walls through sheer force of will. And then disaster struck. A bullet, likely from a handgun, one of the newfangled firearms that were becoming more common, struck Giustiniani in the chest. It penetrated his armor, and he fell. His men carried him from the walls, and he was evacuated to a ship in the harbor. The greatest defender Constantinople had was gone, bleeding and dying. When the defenders saw Giustiniani being carried away, their spirits broke. They had held for hours against impossible odds, but their leader was down. Exhaustion, terror, and despair swept through them like a plague. And that's when Mehmed unleashed his final weapon, the Janissaries. The Janissaries were not like other soldiers. They moved with mechanical precision, disciplined and fearless. They advanced through the smoke and corpses without breaking formation. They found a small gate, the Cercaporta, that someone had left unlocked during the chaos of battle. It was a tiny oversight, a forgotten detail in the madness of combat. It doomed an empire. 50 Janissaries poured through that little gate and raised the Ottoman flag on a tower. Other defenders, seeing the flag, thought that section of the wall had fallen and abandoned their posts. The collapse spread like a disease. Within minutes, the Theodosian Walls, which had stood for over 1,000 years, were breached. Emperor Constantine XI saw the Ottoman banners rising over his city. He knew what it meant. According to legend, he tore off his imperial regalia so he wouldn't be recognized, drew his sword, and charged into the Ottoman ranks. He was never seen again. His body was never identified with certainty. The last Roman emperor died as a common soldier, fighting for a lost cause with the courage that deserved better than the hand history had dealt him. What followed was 3 days that survivors could barely bring themselves to describe. The Ottomans poured into Constantinople like a flood of steel and fury. Mehmed had promised them 3 days of plunder, and they took it. The churches were sacked. The Hagia Sophia, one of the most beautiful buildings ever created, was filled with refugees praying for divine intervention that never came. Ottoman soldiers broke down the doors and found thousands of people, unarmed, defenseless. Many were killed on the spot. More were chained together to be sold as slaves. Ancient icons were smashed, sacred texts burned. Gold was torn from the walls. The streets ran with blood, literally. Chroniclers from both sides describe blood flowing in the gutters like rainwater. Conservative estimates say 50,000 people were enslaved. Thousands more were killed. Women were raped. Children were taken. The elderly were murdered if they had no value as slaves. For 3 days, Constantinople burned and bled. And when Mehmed finally rode into the city and saw the destruction, even he was moved to tears. He had conquered the greatest city in the world, but in doing so, he had nearly destroyed it. Standing in the ruins of the Hagia Sophia, Mehmed quoted a Persian poem. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. The owl calls the watches in the towers of Afrasiab. The medieval era was over. The Renaissance was beginning, and the weapon that ended it was gunpowder. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through Europe. For the first time, people truly understood that walls, no matter how thick, were obsolete. The fundamental defensive advantage that had shaped warfare for thousands of years was gone. gunpowder had changed everything. Knights in armor, the symbols of medieval warfare, were becoming obsolete too. A peasant with a gun could kill a nobleman who had trained his entire life in the arts of war. The social order that had dominated Europe for centuries was beginning to crack. The refugees fleeing Constantinople brought with them ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries. These texts helped fuel the Renaissance. Classical knowledge flooded into Western Europe, and the intellectual explosion that followed would eventually lead to the Reformation, the age of exploration, and the scientific revolution. The Ottoman conquest also closed the land routes to Asia, forcing European powers to seek sea routes to the east. This led directly to the age of exploration, to Columbus, to the discovery of the Americas, and to the eventual European colonization of the globe. Everything changed on May 29, 1453. The medieval world died in blood and gunpowder smoke. A new age was born. Mehmed the Conqueror would go on to build an empire that lasted for centuries. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, would become one of the great cities of the world once again. But it would never be the same city it had been. The walls still stand today, crumbling and forgotten by many who pass them. But if you know where to look, you can still see the scars from Mehmed's cannons. You can still trace the path his ships took over the mountain. You can stand where Constantine made his last stand and feel the weight of history pressing down on you. This was the battle that ended an era. Steel bowed to gunpowder. The medieval age died screaming, and the modern world was born in the ruins of Constantinople. The question that haunts historians is simple. Was this inevitable? Would gunpowder have ended the medieval world anyway? Or was it the unique genius of Mehmed, the desperate courage of Constantine, and the particular circumstances of this siege that made it the turning point? We'll never know. What we do know is that after Constantinople fell, nothing was ever the same. Warfare changed, politics changed, the entire world order shifted on its axis. And it all happened because a 21-year-old sultan looked at the strongest walls in the world and decided they weren't strong enough. Because a Hungarian engineer built a gun that could shatter stone. Because 70 ships crossed a mountain in the night. Because a small gate was left unlocked. History turns on such moments. Empires fall. Ages end, and from the ashes, something new always rises. Constantinople fell, but its legacy endures, in the walls that still stand, in the texts that survived, in the ripples that continue to spread through history, even now, over 500 years later. This was the battle that changed everything, the siege that ended the medieval world, the moment when humanity crossed a threshold from which there was no return. And it all began with ships hauled over mountains.